Good afternoon, and welcome everyone to the DQP Alignment Series Webinar 2, Applied Learning and Civic Learning. I'm Laurel Hunter, Grant Project Manager for the Degree Qualifications Profile Project, and I'll be moderating this webinar today. And I need to advance my slide there. Many of you already know Krista Johns of the ACCJC, who'll be weighing in on our conversation on aligning PLOs with applied learning and civic learning areas of the DQP. We also have a special guest joining us today, Kelly Dagan, Director of Service Learning and Professor of Sociology at Illinois College. And Kelly is here to talk about her experience with civic learning and her extensive work with aligning SLOs at her college. I think it's safe to say that our webinar viewers are participants in DQ projects and are attending today with an eye for examining their project program PLOs, but there may be some of you who are curious about the DQP and what its areas of learning are all about, and it's our hope that after today's webinar, our project participants or anyone else viewing this webinar will walk away with a deeper understanding of how their SLOs can enhance student learning and how aligning with the DQP can get the conversation started. Now, the purpose of this webinar is to provide discussion points for understanding the DQP applied learning and civic learning outcomes, to describe the way colleges are deepening practice through alignment of student learning outcomes in these areas of learning, and to spark conversations at colleges who are working on projects involving the DQP areas of learning. Some of you are familiar with the 5 areas of learning, but for those of you new to the DQP, those areas are broad integrative knowledge, specialized knowledge, applied learning, civic learning, and intellectual skills. And then we have our +1 category, as most colleges have learning outcomes unique to their individual institutions. But here we'll be going into the 5 areas of learning, starting with applied learning and civic learning today. I'm so sorry, we're having a few problems advancing here. Try one more time. Okay, sorry about that little faux pas there, but our DQP project is a project of the Accrediting Commission for Community and Junior Colleges and is supported by a grant from Lumina Foundation. And we have 16 colleges participating in our project, from colleges in California, Hawaii, and the Marshall Islands. And the projects are separated into 2 cohorts, one with individual college projects and the other with cross-institutional collaborations on identified transfer degrees. Okay. And you can contact us at if you have questions about our projects or the DQP, you can contact us at lhunter@accjc.org or check out our website at www.dqpp.org. So allow me to welcome Krista Johns. Thank you for joining us today, Krista. Let's begin with a discussion about applied learning. Krista, don't most instructors use applied learning methods in their classrooms these days? I mean, what more is needed to get colleges aligned with this area of the DQP?
Hi, Laurel. Well, first let me just say that you and I are sharing the microphone today, so for people who are listening and watching, you'll see the name of Laurel Hunter for when both I am speaking and Laurel is speaking, so don't be confused about that. But I do think that it would be good for us to begin by looking at the definition of applied learning. And if you look on the screen, there are 2 pieces to applied learning in terms of the competency that the degree qualifications profile discusses. It's how knowledge and skills from coursework are applied in non-academic settings, and then in the reverse, how application of learning from external experiences is made to come to pass in the classroom environment. And so we what I would say in response to your question is that we're not so much talking about a teaching methodology, but instead talking about what it means for a student to gain competency in that area. The DQP is really not about how we have students work in our classrooms with exercises and so on, although that can be a part of it. It's really about student learning and how we measure that in this area, and we'll get into that, what that means more in a minute or two. We are also talking about outcomes that need to be transparent to a wider audience than may have been the case in times past. Now students need to know, employers and transfer institutions, what we mean by applied learning and the other outcomes that are part of our degree program. And then really the outcomes are to be applicable across the curriculum. We're not talking about applied learning, let's say in a career technical program, as might have been the case in times past. So, you know, that would be my response to the questions asked. And, you know, in thinking about why this is beneficial, if you look at the categories of the DQP and at the degree level outcomes associated with them, what it allows a faculty to do is to really go deep in analyzing where they are with their student learning outcomes and discuss what that SLO practice means in the real world for students in their classes. It's also about intentionality. You know, it gives us the chance to go once again back into our curriculum with an intense focus on what we want students to have when they graduate. And also it helps us close the loop. We need to evaluate our SLOs from time to time and to realign them and the curriculum for what we want to achieve and what we want our students to achieve. So that in short, or maybe not too short, Laurel, is how I would respond.
Okay, great, great. Well, I'm always shocked by the number of colleges working through the DQP that unveil gaps in applied learning. It seems to me like such an obvious and necessary educational component, yet so many colleges haven't ever looked at their curriculum under that lens. The DQP defines applied learning as a set of learning competencies that make clear what graduates can do with their newly acquired learning. So in other words, beyond memorizing test questions or textbook topics, how can that learning be applied in the real world? Or the reverse, how might a student apply outside learning in the classroom? Can you talk to our audience about this?
Sure, and let me just say that we have, for many, many years in higher education, known what we're doing, but may not have been in the capacity to explain that to other folks. And so as long as I've been involved in higher education, which believe me is a long time, we have assumed that of course students will be taking what they learn through their college education and applying it in the work world. And so what we have added here these days is a charge that our students need to be partners with us in that learning. They need to know what it is that we have as outcomes that they should be achieving within courses, within programs. And so our students want to be informed about this, and they want their education to translate into skills they can apply on the job or in their continuing education. So really what you're seeing is more on the communication side than really in the practice side. I think there have been a lot of great practices, but just not shared as publicly as you might expect.
So how does a college or a program begin to address the concept of applied learning?
You know, some of our projects have been embarking on this discussion, and the department faculty have been exploring discussions in connection with the DQP, and they've been doing it by asking a series of questions. And so to talk about some of these questions, I think would be helpful. And we are not presupposing that anything is in place at a college. We begin by suggesting that you can talk about what is being done or what you think you would want to have done in light of the conversation. But one of the questions is for the department faculty to identify ways in which the instruction in their discipline and for their degree program use applied learning as a part of the curriculum. And usually that is a lively discussion, and people see that applied learning, at least in putting into practice the general principles into an applied kind of an exercise, is happening. May not be as much that students are bringing the real world experience into the classroom and then learning how to apply the abstract principles for better solutions. But nevertheless, the next question is, how is this practice reflected in the SLOs? And often that comes with a pause, and people realize that this is really not necessarily reflected in the program level outcomes. All right, so then another question would be, what efforts are made to ensure that students understand they are gaining competency in applied learning? We often have beautifully designed courses with exercises or outside the class activities, and that extra meta-learning step of explaining to students what they are gaining, both for the immediate class as well as for their long-term development, is not shared. And so the question is, how are we making sure they know this? And how is increased competency measured? How is it that the students can know and the instructors can know that the students are actually moving forward? We have, I'm sorry, but we've had some advances in our slides, and so I'm going to bounce back. I'm sorry to say we have, I don't know how that happened, but anyway, here we go for our next question. The other thing we want people to do is to discuss across the curriculum in their degree program rather than just in individual courses how this particular competency would be introduced, reinforced, and then how you get to the level of measuring that a student has arrived at a point you'd expect at the end of their program studies. This can be an interesting conversation because many of the courses are not sequential in that way for many degrees. And so what you're really talking about is tracking how students are being exposed to this learning competency and then exhibiting deeper levels of application and demonstration as they go through their course studies. And so how is the scaffolding happening and how is that taking place is the question for the department members. There's another question that is useful, and that is there an emphasis in applied learning for students in this degree program? Is there a particular area within which students should feel very competent and confident in applying the general principles of their college education to a variety of experiences and problems out in the real world? And is there an area in which students really need to be able to, while they're experiencing a problem, revert back to their training to say, here's how I can find solutions? And then, is this communicated and discussed across the departmental faculty? I would even push the question, is it discussed with the general education faculty whose courses are also a part of the program? And then what other considerations might the discipline have in this area of applied learning?
Right. Well, some of the feedback that we've had are questions like, wouldn't it be impossible for some teachers of certain subjects to send their students out into the world to apply their learning? For example, how could someone apply algebra or statistics outside the classroom? Or take, for example, an English major who has to take biology. How could they apply their learning about biology to their field?
I have heard that question a lot, Laurel. And to that question, I would have to say there is no way that people should be able to say their subject does not pertain to applied learning. There could be at times certain curriculum building blocks that aren't immediately connected to the real world. Sorry, math folks, but let me just use this example. In math, general arithmetic is very much applied. People can see how you have to use percentages and add, subtract, and many other things in the real world. Then one moves to algebra. And in a sense, algebra is that training ground in mathematical thinking that's needed in order to get back to the fun stuff, the calculus and so on, in the courses that follow. But those building blocks shouldn't be huge because people need the application, and those themselves can be connected for students. The mental training and the training in a way of thinking is a kind of learning and an application that students will need throughout their lives. There are times those building blocks need to be acquired, even if they are not immediately useful on the job, so to speak. I'll give you an easy example. Think of job hunting. For job hunting, you have to build a resume, develop a cover letter, you have to learn how to interview. One could argue that to a large degree, you don't need those specific skills on the job. But you do need those building blocks in order to get employed. And so we would not expect someone to spend their entire college career learning how to do resume, cover letters, and so on. But they definitely need to have building blocks such as those in order to get employed. So I'm hoping that that explains how it is that virtually any course should have the applied learning. If we look at worries, I mostly hear faculty saying, we get it, applied learning should be a part of what we do in our curriculum, but our curriculum is jam-packed. So the issue is more, how do we get this worked in? We can't do field trips, we have no time. We've just revised our curriculum, we can't put another change in. And I would just say, take a breath, relax, and just start where you are. Look for places in your current course and program structure where you can address applied learning and where you can actually just overtly begin showing students how their work is going to be applicable elsewhere so that they can have that as a part of their repertoire of skills when they leave the program.
But what about other kinds of obstacles that come up? We had one college say that they'd love to engage more in applied learning activities, but they're limited by college administration because of liability and things like that. What would you say to that?
There are definite limitations to how much time can be outside the classroom. There is the requirement to make sure that course requirements are met and that there's assessment, and at the community college level, there are even attendance type of records that must be maintained. But that should not be an obstacle. Faculty know very well how to create situations in the classroom to apply general principles in assignments and in projects. And they have ways in which they can have students bring their own life experiences into the classroom and work with them there. So I would not be deterred by having a current moratorium on field trips or in having issues around risk or whatever be raised.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then on that note, can you just talk a little bit about some of the most memorable examples of applied learning that you've seen along the way?
Oh, sure, I can. But in this case, really, we're looking at the best examples being ones where the student barely notices it's happening. It's built so naturally into the course. But I know I was taken by one of the social science research methodologies curriculums at one of the colleges where I worked. They were involved in a research scavenger hunt. The students were given the task of some information they needed to find, and they were set loose on trying to find where they would locate this information in state and county and local records. And it really sparked a lot of ideas for students on how this would be useful, not just in preparing your master's degree paper or whatever it is, but how this could be useful. In economics, I've seen people being assigned that they are trying to identify the right site for a new business. And they have to compare cost of living indices in various locations that have been proposed. There again, the discussions really allow students to understand how the questions and the methods for solving those questions apply to real-world problems. In English, I really like it when the courses are linked with other programs. So you may have English with a link to the cohort of students in the early childhood education program, for example. And there, students are shown how the organization of papers, how the gathering and synthesis of information from the readings really is a skill they will need in their work in early childhood education out in the work world. The other one I thought that was fun was sort of bring your issue, bring the thing that's bothering you in the work world, and then of course with some screening by the instructor, those are put back into a bag and students are pick one out, and they need to explain how a particular author they've been reading would address the problem of the day. So those are just some examples. I think the real question is for departments, how do you decide what is that essential application, the ability to apply abstract principles to new real-world examples, and how you can solve problems out there in the world using information from your college instruction? What are those pieces that are important for that department?
So what kind of skills or competencies should a student walk away with from applied learning, in your opinion? In other words, how can you know that the student can effectively use knowledge gained in the classroom and they're able to apply it in the field or out in the real world?
So I guess I would begin with the first question of how do students, or how do we know anytime a student has gained competency? I mean, as we identify SLOs across our courses and our programs, how do we know that students have achieved those learning or other milestones? And I would have to say that this is where assessment comes in. You're going to have ways in which students are demonstrating this learning. It isn't, we'll know it when we see it. That is part of the art and the science of determining how we know. I would say, you're looking at assignments, you're looking at projects. What are you looking for? Well, this would depend on the discipline, but are students able to look, let's say in a statistics course, are they able to look at statistics with a critical eye and determine whether the presentation is appropriate for the information being shared? That might be an important element of application in a program where statistics and research is a key part of a program. For any program, does the student, after being exposed to the instruction in this area, demonstrate that they have a wider repertoire for solving problems? Are they able to use principles they've learned in an enlightened way, let's say, to find multiple solutions to things? That would just be a couple of examples. But then, to me, equally to the point is, how do the students know they have gained that competency? The SLOs are always also about how a student can understand that they have gained that learning, that competency that's critical for their next step in their life.
Okay. I'm always interested in the DQP in that particular area of learning, also bringing classroom, bringing to the classroom information to bear on the materials in the classroom from the outside world. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. And we know about learning, and frankly, a lot of what we do is in a sort of an artificial environment. We create experiences in the classroom that students can spark off of. But in general, people bring their external experience into the classroom, whether we know it or not. This allows you to directly and overtly bring it forward, and to have people identify with a direct experience that's provoked, and then to think about it, to look at what they have done, to ponder it. What have I done? How do I feel about it? What do I think about it? And to analyze it in a way that allows for the generalization of principles that can be applied to similar situations in the future. And this is also where principles that are key to the degree program can be inserted, and students can learn to work with those principles. And then ultimately there has to be the application again to a new situation, assessment of how successful that was, to validate that, yes, hey, these principles do work. I can apply them in a variety of ways. So I would say that process is one that is not foreign to the classroom, but the difference is really having students come in beginning first with that direct experience and then moving through for generalization and getting abstract principles to apply. I would say that in order to achieve or get this cycle of learning, colleges and especially faculty have been very good at creating vicarious direct experiences. People use video, people read stories from other people, they're hearing presentations of fellow classmates. There are many ways in which that direct experience can be done vicariously as well as directly from a student's life.
All right. Well, in conclusion, can you just summarize very briefly for our audience why is applied learning, why is that essential, an essential educational component by the DQP?
Okay, I will, and I want to go back, not really, because I don't want to flip any more of these PowerPoints, but I wanted to quote again that quotation from the Degree Qualifications Profile document that the authors of the DQP, the 4 higher education folks that were involved. What graduates can do with what they know is the most critical outcome of higher education. And so it's clearly a part of every department's curriculum. I would have to say that this is how we prepare students with the skills necessary to be the lifelong learners we're always talking about. This is the way that students enrich the presentation from their AA degree programs and go deeper and broader with them as they advance through higher education or in the workplace. It's really the test and proof of our relevance also in higher education. If we can't clearly show how what is taught is important for life, we need to question our programs a little bit. If, there has to be the way in which not only do people trust us that the educational experience that we've designed through our curriculum and our programs has validity in the real world. There has to be a way for them to see it and feel it directly themselves. And this is what this competency is all about. And then, I hear faculty saying, well, the unknown factor in every semester is the student. We never know who's going to walk in the door. And to that I would say, but in a way, doesn't that make it known? That is, we know every semester we will have different students walking in the door. And the task is really to design the curriculum in a way that they are partners with the instructor in that in that process. And so I would say that we are, we have to agree this is an essential competency. How it is played out is for the department faculty to figure out.
All right. Well, we need to move on to civic learning, but is there anything else that you'd like to say about civic learning before we move, about applied learning before we move on to civic learning?
Yeah, so this is a picture of a dog learning how to sit in a wheelbarrow in the middle of a living room. And what the point of that picture was to, here, let me.
I still apologize.
That's right.
There we go.
Was to show how we buttonhole or bootstrap experiences for students into the classroom. Really, the process for taking abstract principles from your field and applying them to real-world practice should be as close to real life as possible. And if we are straining, then perhaps it's being not done well. It should be a natural thing, and I believe that department faculty in their conversations can really help one another make this very valid and reliable and very smooth for students. So I want to let people feel very calm about how this can work within any curriculum.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Krista. And my apologies for our technical difficulties there. We've been having a few problems with advancing our slides, but we're going to move into civic learning. And as I mentioned, we have Kelly Dagan, who is, Kelly is the director of, and I'm having trouble advancing my slide again. I'm not sure what's going on here. There we go. Kelly is the Director of Service Learning and Professor of Sociology at Illinois College. Welcome, Kelly. Kelly, can you begin by telling us a little bit about yourself and how and why your college became interested in the DQP?
Sure, I would love to. Well, first of all, I wanted to indicate that most of what I'm going to be presenting here today or talking about today is an overview of work I engaged in with a colleague by the name of Karen Dean for our DQP project as an institution through Lumina for the Higher Learning Commission as well. So I just wanted to make sure to indicate that. Much of what we were interested in as a college for our DQP project was to really be more intentional about living out our mission. Our mission is indicated here on this slide, and the last sentence is really what I suppose I'd like to draw your attention to, that we're attempting to develop students for fulfilling lives of leadership and service. And I don't know that this inclusion of leadership and service in our mission is so very different from what other mission statements include for institutions of higher education, but we had sort of decided as a college we wanted to be more intentional about living out that mission. Not sure where my slide is.
There you go.
There we go. So what really happened for us was sort of three events that came together in an interesting way. So to intentionally live out that mission, the faculty decided to revise our general education program to be mission-driven, and we have called it the blueprint. One of the prime changes here in our general education was a focus on including 2 civic engagement experiences of all students. So we were trying to be much more intentional about both civic engagement and learning that could come from that. Additionally, our Board of Trustees developed a document they entitled Realizing the Vision, which was basically a plan that identified the most important aspects of our college's strategic plan. And from that document, leadership and service really took center stage. And a leadership program was developed here at Illinois College with service and service learning really at its core. So it was the sort of confluence of these three events or initiatives that made investigating the DQP attractive to us and something we wanted to use to our advantage, if at all possible.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, like many of our college projects, your college identified a gap in civic learning, and you were involved in a lot of work around that specific DQP area of learning. And when talking about civic learning, many colleges automatically think that their students are getting civic learning because they're required to take U.S. history or American government as part of their GE requirements. Talk to me a little bit about why this isn't necessarily true.
Sure. Illinois College is a liberal arts institution, so we are constantly trying to sort of discuss and highlight the real benefits to making connections across campus, that initiatives don't become sort of siloized in one area of campus, and that for us, this notion of civic learning was going to be the same. That one course, one political science course, was not enough to really develop those qualities of leadership in service in our students. Also, if something like civic learning is housed primarily in one area, that might seem potentially like an area that is not attractive to some students. So if something like civic learning is housed in political science, students may not be attracted to that or may feel they don't want to be involved in politics as such. So we really wanted to make civic learning something that was engaged in from beginning to end as an Illinois College student. So one example of this is that in our first year program, students, their very first semester here, all engage in a common service event, and that's linked to a common reading in their first year seminar courses. So we really made the move in that program right from the beginning to get us moving from just service and being engaged in the community to learning from that type of engagement. We certainly have other courses that offer civic engagement and civic learning opportunities as well. But we really wanted to get students to see right away that this is what it means to be an Illinois College student, this commitment to service and learning from that service. So we have a number of other courses then after that that students can take advantage of in terms of their civic learning. One of these courses is an interdisciplinary course here where the civic learning that takes place is a result of a reading program that the students in that course engage in with students in our local public school district, particularly a school with one of the highest poverty rates. Another opportunity for students is in a sociology course that I happen to teach that is a service learning course, where to successfully complete the course, you have to engage in 40 hours of service, and then we reflect on those service experiences, that civic engagement throughout the entirety of the course. So we really want to highlight from beginning, from the very first semester you're here, through your different gen eds, that this is sort of the expectation of an Illinois College student.
All right. Kelly, in your work in the area of civic learning, several of your art courses require civic learning or service learning activities. And I'm really interested in this because we frequently have people say that civic learning simply can't be applied in certain disciplines. And art is one of those that's frequently used as an example. So can you tell me a little bit about how your college incorporated civic learning in the context of art?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Much like applied learning, we're seeing a common theme here that oftentimes it's seen as not something that can be engaged in widely, but we really believe that civic learning can be. So our art department has actually been fantastic in terms of their willingness to try to be involved within the community here, in the larger community, in lots of ways. So some of our first forays with the art department into civic learning was for them to help develop some logos for different programs. So they did so. We sponsored a contest of the art students to develop a logo for this reading mentorship program that I just mentioned called the Sonia Project here on campus. And you can see on the left picture here on the slide, highlight sort of the winner of that particular contest. But then we started to notice that there were other needs, obviously, in a larger community. We became aware of a new homeless shelter that was going to be opening, and I had some interactions with the director of that center, and she was looking for some help developing a logo for that shelter that could be used. And so I went to the art department, and they were happy to help with that. The students contributed in that sort of thing. But when the art professor went to meet with the director about this logo, he came back to me and said, we think we want to do more than just develop a logo. So what they ended up doing was the professor of this course developed an assignment where the students would create art that would be placed in the homeless shelter. The idea being, right, that art should be for everyone, that art can make folks feel better, that it can bring interest to your life, even if you're in a place that's not where you had planned to be. So these are some photos of the artwork that the students in that course created. The one on the left, obviously, is sort of a sculptural element. There were some paintings that were created and given to the shelter. The photo on the left is a recycled door that the students decided to hang in the homeless shelter. That door actually opens, and it is always stocked with paper and pens and pencils so that the residents of the homeless shelter may write some poetry, can do some sketching, some drawing. If they're fortunate enough to get a home of their own, they can leave some inspirational messages to those who come after them at the shelter. So it was just fascinating, and the students reported they were shocked, obviously, that in an art class they would learn about poverty and homelessness, but they did. They learned about this being a problem in our community. They learned about this new organization, and we're really happy to potentially help the folks who were staying there in a significant way.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Kelly. I just love that example of civic learning. That's just one of the best I've ever seen. So moving on to the next question, as our college project teams have begun the process of mapping their outcomes to the DQP, we frequently hear that there's a gap in civic learning, and what kind of advice can you give to colleges who've identified gaps in the area of civic learning?
Okay, I think the first important advice I would have is to sort of, when you're identifying your gaps, to first start with recognizing and acknowledging what you are in fact doing and what you're doing well. We don't want to set sort of the stage for departments or disciplines or faculty to be defensive about what's not being done. So I think it's important to highlight what is being done. Secondly, when you find gaps, I think it's really important to be very specific about what those gaps are. Are the gaps of just simply not doing this at all? Are they gaps that revolve around the issues of success of what you're doing? Perhaps you're doing some civic engagement or civic learning, but it's not been successful. Are the gaps about where it's happening on your campus? Again, has it sort of been siloized and it's not being engaged in across the board? When Illinois College started sort of noting our gaps, we saw pretty quickly that we were not finding much civic engagement and civic learning occurring in the sciences. And so when we saw that, we made that a particular goal to get some civic learning happening there. And I just have a quick example I wanted to share here of when we identified that gap. We went to the biology department, again, indicating all of the great things that they do, but asking if they'd be interested in maybe thinking through what else they might be able to do with regard to civic learning. And one biology professor in particular was interested. When I first sat down to speak with her about this, she had an idea of doing some experiments in the local school district, which was fine, but she didn't seem very excited about it. She wasn't particularly passionate about it. And I asked her, I said, you don't seem excited about this. And she said, well, I'm not really. What I'm excited about right now and you know, sort of interested in is my immunology class. And so after some brainstorming, we actually developed this particular civic learning plan. So her students in immunology and then later in the Tri Beta Honorary Society, Biology Honorary Society, decided that they were going to both raise awareness and raise money for HIV and AIDS. So what they engaged in basically was sort of an unorthodox bake sale, if you will. You can see the photos here of cookies that are decorated to look like the HIV virus as well as other kinds of cells. And you can see here then the point is to give some information both about AIDS and about biology at the same time that you're raising awareness and raising money. So this was a really nice result after identifying this particular gap. And so my final piece of advice, I guess, in this short period of time here is to highlight what happens here. Identify people on campus who are either already engaged in civic learning in their classes and or are open to it, and then use them. Get them excited about a project, an idea, and then put them out there. Once they have a great idea, highlight that all over campus. It really, the enthusiasm really, we have found, has been infectious when you identify some key people who really are interested in doing some of this and then also highlighting the benefits of it.
Well, thank you for sharing that example as well. Those are both just very bold and creative examples of civic learning activities. So we'll have to move on here. What else is important to know about civic learning in the context of student learning and a student's unique place in community, society, or in an ever-expanding, more global world?
Sure. I think what we have to keep in mind, if you're thinking about students while they're sort of in college and having that college experience, is that they're not necessarily permanent residents or a permanent part of the larger community in which the college or university resides. So having conversations about what it means to be a part of a community, whether that is, right, local or more global, is particularly important. So getting them interested and seeing themselves as a part of the community is really key, I think. In terms of student learning, what we've found through utilizing the DQP and civic learning is that students are really seeing a greater amount of complexity, both in their local communities and globally, when they're engaged in service learning. We see them being much more creative with how they're thinking about issues and problems and solutions. And more than anything else, we're really trying to get students to see that being civically engaged and learning from that civic engagement should be a constant in their lives while they're here at the college or the university, but also beyond in their communities in which they live, and again, globally. So the complexity, the creativity, the constant nature of civic engagement and civic learning is what we're really trying to highlight in terms of our outcomes with our students here at Illinois College.
Great, great. Is there anything else you'd like to share that stands out as significant from your work around SLOs in civic learning?
Well, I think students generally, we have to be wary of just assuming they're going to get it or make the connection on their own, if you will. It's really important that that reflection piece of civic learning be really thought about very carefully. How are we asking them to make connections, as Krista was saying before, so that they see the connections that exist, as well as educators, us being able to know that they're making those connections. So I think a lot of time and attention really needs to be paid to the reflection part of civic learning, how we're asking them to discuss, think about, analyze their experiences in the larger society. Sometimes I think the reflection can get a bit of a short shrift, and I would caution against that.
All right. Kelly, it looks like you might want to advance your slide.
Thank you very much.
Got one more question for you here. Have you had a reaction from the community or the college or a result that you were happy about as your result of your work with civic learning in the DQP?
Yes, definitely. I think starting with some reactions from campus here, we, the assessment committee that is in charge of assessing general education has decided to sort of use our model from our pilot project to assess civic learning campus-wide. So that's something that we're happy about, and we think validates our work on our pilot project. I think we've also noticed more comments from the larger community, more feedback from the larger community about noticing our students more being engaged in a greater number and a greater variety of ways in the larger community. So that is nice to see. We've also, for example, we've seen an increase in our ranking in Washington Monthly. So there are lots of ranking systems, I know, but this, we think, this increase for us, we believe, has had a significant amount to do with our civic learning that has been, I think, made possible, more intentional through the use of the DQP.
Great, great. All right, well, we're going to have to move along here. Is
Sure.
there anything else that you would like to add? We're looking at this slide of the summer workshops and the
Sure. Yes, I think very briefly I can just add that institutional support for this kind of work is really important, and we've been very lucky at Illinois College here that we've had a good deal of institutional support. So stipends for people to participate in summer workshops around the DQP and civic learning in particular. Again, our curriculum committee has signed on and is using our work as campus-wide assessment measures. And certainly we've seen an increased accountability on campus with regard to these kinds of efforts. So again, institutional support, I think, is really key to make this work across campus.
Great, great. And can you be contacted here? If
Yes, I can. So we have lots of other really interesting projects going on campus. If anyone is looking for some ideas, and we have some, I'm happy to share them. Or if anybody is interested in talking more just about our path and how we made some things happen, I'm also happy to share that information as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kelly, for your really great input and just being a really great resource for us and for anyone else looking at civic learning. So before we end, I want to bring Krista back into the discussion on civic learning. Krista, during our work with the DQP, we've had a lot of discussions about civic learning as questions have come up in the field. Why do you think civic learning is turning up as one of the most perplexing categories for teachers and faculty who immediately think political science, history, etc.? Why is this category so consistently misunderstood?
Well, I would have to say that it may be the words that are used. Let's look at this definition of civic learning. And the definition here, this is related to the DQP category of civic learning, is about understanding oneself in relation to others in a civil society and developing readiness for and acceptance of each person's obligation to contribute to their community. I think some of the terms we use when we talk about civic learning tend to create assumptions about where these kinds of programs should lie or who has the responsibility for this kind of learning. Even using civic, many people automatically begin to think, well, that must mean about society, maybe government, this must be in the social sciences. When we look at the outcomes, you'll see the use of the term democratic values, and people start thinking about U.S. government and so on, as opposed to the notion of participation in community, participation in civic matters. and even contributions to community. They may be thinking of voluntary contributions, sort of good works kinds of contributions, which are certainly important, but we're not talking about civic learning in that category only. We're really talking about being a member of society as an employee or as a business owner or in fun on a sports team, and how your interactions really are informed by your sense of what it means to be that person in that community. And so I think that part of the issue really is about use of words rather than sort of a rejection of the concept.
Yeah, I think that, you know, you've often said that it's so important for students to know where they fit in, you know, where their learning fits into the world, and I think that's a great example. In our work, some colleges think they've already got courses that align to the DQP. Lots of people think, well, we already have that covered, and they think they don't have any work to do there. Tell me why that's just almost 100% of the time wrong.
Well, as a first comment, let me just say that in general, SLOs, student learning outcomes, don't do a lot about anything or for anybody when they're just sitting on a page. But what makes a difference in the life or the experience of a student in a particular degree program is how those student learning outcomes capture the essence of what skills and competencies the students should be gaining, and informs the way that courses are designed, how they're sequenced, and in how a program is delivered. And so to the thought that we're already there, I'm going to have to say, I don't think so. You know, I mean, I think there is always something more we can do in connecting our students with where they need to be. This point's already been made, but just to say again, we're really not talking about learning how to participate in elections or understanding how government works. There will be students who are completely fascinated with those subjects. Even in those subjects, the real issue is, what is my place? How do I understand my role in those processes as a member of my community? So the other thing is that when we go down a pathway of civic learning, we're saying that we're not into learning just for learning's sake. Every student is being prepared for their purpose. And most of us have a lot of shared purposes. You know, we're all looking for that magical one thing that's just our purpose and no one else will have it. But many of us share purposes in terms of supporting our communities, engaging in meaningful employment, contributions to society, and students need to be prepared for that. The other piece that we can't overlook is that our students are engaged in the stages of human development when they're in our colleges and in our institutions, and how they make that transition from seeing the universe revolving around themselves to seeing themselves as a member of a great other world is a key developmental step, and it doesn't happen necessarily automatically. This is one of the tasks that a college education can help with, and really it is critical to a student's moral and ethical development. And so it is the role of an institution of higher education to see to it that students are able to do that. And then really I do see this as a responsibility for every discipline. Graduates from any degree program should be able to demonstrate how they see themselves in their community and what they consider their contribution to be. And so I just could not imagine us being able to say we're there already.
Exactly. So in your opinion, what are the expectations faculty should have for its degree recipients in terms of understanding oneself in relation to others in a civil society? What are those expectations?
Well, first of all, I have to give kudos to Kelly and to Illinois College for going the route of being, to really transform their general education in connection with their mission. I just love that that is a singular aspect of being a student at that institution. And so I have to say that that is an outcome that's critical to that institution, and is probably one that's important at a lot of them. But it's useful to look at the DQP outcomes, the student learning outcomes that fall within this definition or area of learning, of civic learning. And if you look at it, the first one is about describing one's own civic and cultural background, including their origins, development, assumptions, and predispositions. It really is it begins with a student being able to see where they fit in and that they are influenced by lots of things. We're talking about the example from Illinois College related to art. And, you know, it would be important for a student to perhaps begin to understand how their opinions around art have been formed, whether they have perspectives related to public art, for example. What is their idea around censorship, or what is appropriate expression, artistic expression in the public venue? Those are all pieces that are very much informed by a student's own background, their own assumptions, the way that they were brought up. And that's an early step, an important step in civic learning. They need to be able to describe historical and contemporary positions on democratic values and practices. And these are ones where I really feel the discipline should understand what is important to its graduates, its degree recipients, as to civic society. How is it that, what are those issues, what are the positions about public involvement that an art student needs to know when they graduate with an art degree? One might ask that same question for a creative writing student or a science student. And then how are they going to take an active role? This is, again, I want to stress, it isn't just about being involved in doing good work. It's about the fact that you will, for the most part, be an employee or running a business and have employees. What does that mean in the context of your degree program for how one would engage with community as an employee? It isn't just about participating in other projects, but that's a vital part. And that I love the civic engagement activities that colleges create for students to be involved. But let's not forget, many degrees are preparing people for the workplace. And then, you know, how to be able to say, in our world, we are supposed to be preparing people to understand the issues pertaining to our program and be a voice out there in the community for what they're supposed to represent. Do we do that as an overt part of the learning in our program? And if not, how do we do that so that they have this civic learning, this competency before they leave?
Well, I really love that answer because, like I said, you know, coming back to the idea that this is the most misunderstood category, we get a lot of feedback about civic learning, and some of that feedback also suggests that not everybody thinks that students need to view themselves in the context of how they fit or how they can give back to society or their community. So what would you say to someone who says they don't think it's their place to make students see how their learning fits in the scope of civic learning and civic engagement?
I would have to say that every discipline and every field has its mark on society. And while we often in our departments and in our programs are able to be occasionally removed from that and just to enjoy the theoretical level of our field. The reality is for our students, when they have a degree, it is not likely to be geared toward, although it could be as an instructor or to remain in higher education. It really is in many, many other facets. Even if we're saying they will join us in the ranks of higher education faculty or administrators, what is the mark of our field in that kind of practice? And I would also have to pose the question in the negative to say, if there is a field that does not have any impact on society, is this a field for which publicly funded institutions should have support? You know, those are the exact kinds of questions that the general public asks when they are questioning what it is that higher education is doing. I would be able to refute those claims or those questions for my program, and I know faculty members in all the disciplines are anxious to do the same.
So I think what I hear you saying is that, I guess I'll pose the question, is there any subject that someone could say, you know, so like auto mechanics, obviously that's a valuable course of study, but how could that be applied in a civic setting?
Well, what I would have to say is that students involved in an auto mechanics program are almost certainly involved for future employment. They will be working in and perhaps running their own business in a community, providing service to other community members. So there is definitely a place in community for that field. What are some of the issues that a student may have to explore their own opinions on and to gain insight in their program? You could look at what are the values around vehicle ownership that seem to be so keen in some communities. What are the societal values around emissions and emissions control and environmental issues? Are there ethical issues related to effective business practices or in hiring of employees that we really would want the students in these programs to be aware of and have a voice about? I could do the same thing really in any other field. I have to tell you that we recently had 20 faculty members from 2 community colleges in California discuss ways specifically, subject by subject, in which civic learning fits naturally into fields. They specifically discussed biology, English, math, early childhood education, sociology, computer sciences, communications, psychology, and automotive tech. And the list was incredible. There is really no doubt that students in these programs are finding ways to learn about who they are relative to society and what their contribution will be. The issue is more, how do we make that overt for the students, and how does this become a vital part of the curriculum? I think it's the way in which we make ourselves relevant to our students.
Great. Well, are there any other examples, insights, or observations regarding learning outcomes particular to civic learning that you'd like to share?
Well, I just want to say again that the discussion around civic learning can bring departments into deeper conversations about how their degree programs are preparing students for life after graduation and for making the contribution that the field is proud of, that discipline is proud of. And so while looking at the DQP outcomes, it really is a framework that can move the conversation into the guts of it quickly. We're not so worried about how will we formulate our conversation and what will be the outcome. No, let's use this framework and use it just so that we can enter in and think about our practices deeply. It does allow us to look at gaps in our outcomes, and it allows us to say, wait a minute, we were not thinking on this order at the time we developed these SLOs. They may be 10, 15 years old. We want to look again and make sure that they are relevant and inform the way we offer our courses and our programs. And then it does allow individuals to look across other departments within the same college and even other colleges to see what they have to say in these particular areas of outcome. I wanted to give an example of a worksheet that some of our colleges are using to get concrete on these discussions around student learning outcomes. And this is one where we're looking at civic learning. So you see on the left-hand side, the column is just the definition of civic learning and the outcomes of civic learning from the degree qualifications profile for the associate degree. In the middle are 3 examples of outcomes from colleges, and just to have different ones up there for us to look at. But the alignment often is, first, just a dump. We're going to dump our outcomes that we already have into the column so we can look at them next to the DQP ones and see how they relate. If you look at the one at the top, it may be a little bit more aligned with the traditional idea of civic engagement, civic learning. The one in the middle demonstrate an understanding, but what do we want people to do? How is that understanding going to portray itself particular to our degree? How is it that that understanding is going to show itself in certain kinds of action? And then the last one, analyze, apply, and practice healthy lifestyle choices. That's a wonderful outcome. I love it. If that's the only one, I think we want more of our students. We want our students to be able to engage with a lot of their own upbringing, understand issues they will deal with in society, and have perspectives and ways to deal with those that are developed through their program of study. But those are just my projections on this list. It would be up to the faculty in the departments which have these outcomes to engage in a conversation to say, wait a minute, does this capture all we want to say about civic learning? And have we really understood this as a critical developmental step in a college student's career with us that we have to have a part in? And then the third column is really, while we're in the midst of these conversations, should we develop a to-do list? Some items that we realize we need to work on. Maybe we want to add additional outcomes. We want to tweak the ones we have. Maybe we really have to get that conversation going in our department. What are those pieces of civic learning that are essential for people in our field, students coming out of our degree program? And then how do we talk with the general education faculty to ensure that their vision for civic learning is compatible with ours, the one that we have in our degree program? And how do we ensure that some of those pieces really form a seamless package of learning for students rather than little increments but not necessarily easy to associate with one another? So this kind of an exercise can be very helpful for that purpose. And we're encouraging our projects to actually have as a goal an item, a thing called a degree specification, so that this work is not lost. And it's a way in which you create these conversations, you gain clarity, and you're able to describe for students, the public, yourselves, from a learning outcome perspective, what does this degree mean? Not the courses taken, but what does this mean if you look at the outcomes only? And so without digressing too much, one of the fun conversations is, if we look at the outcomes for this program, the student learning outcomes and competencies, our description of the kinds of careers for which students are being prepared all of a sudden opens up much wider than in our traditional look at just the courses taken. That's just one. But so there, we have a worksheet that you can get on our website, the DQPP.org worksheet, that lets people go through and talk about pieces that might be, from a student learning perspective, important to put in a description for folks to access. To make this a little bit more readable, you'd have some of the usual suspects. Of course, what is the reason for the degree? Why does it exist? And maybe some key characteristics of it. Career pathways we've talked about. There may be something important in the educational style that people who are looking either from employer side or transfer side, or even students shopping around to pick a program would want to know. But then at the crux of this is these core learning and competencies. And we really think that working through the DQP areas of learning, really understanding what those are, and then looking at the outcomes, opens up a huge conversation for how you would describe the learning and the competencies that comes from a program in a way that can be put into a one page front and back and be very understandable and very easy to use across the campus and across programs. And so I'm using this because I say that in conversations around civic learning, if the conversation remains kind of what is the wording of our outcome, or here's what we've decided we're doing, you never really get deeper. And the process really is just busy work. And that would be my opinion, is just tweaking, just have one person in a room just changing the words here or there. If we're really trying to transform a student's experience and transform our curriculum accordingly, and if we are going to demonstrate to others, to the public, to employers, to transfer institutions, the true significance of our program, we will want to take it deeper. And these explorations today have really just been two examples of how we can do that with these areas of learning.
And very great examples at that. Thank you so much, Krista. Well, you've just heard from Krista Johns of the Accrediting Commission for Community and Junior Colleges, and our special guest, Kelly Dagan from the Illinois College. Once again, thank you both so much for sharing your expertise and insight about applied learning and civic learning today. And thanks to Robert Dumas and Niloa for all of their assistance in hosting our webinar series. And I hope you'll join us next time when we'll be talking about student learning outcomes as well as intellectual skills, or what most colleges call institutional learning outcomes. And that webinar will take place this Friday, November 22nd at 12:30 p.m. Pacific Coast time, and you can register by visiting our website at dqpp.org and visiting the webinars page. If you have any questions about this webinar or have questions you'd like to have addressed, please feel free to send them to lhunter@accjc.org, and we'll try to address them in one of our upcoming webinars. And once again, a special thanks to Krista Johns and Kelly Dagan for joining us. Thank you so much, and have a great day.